Good morning, everyone. We're going to start the meeting for the California High-Speed Rail Authority's Board of Directors for June the 29th. Welcome. We'll start this morning by Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director
Okay.
Shank. Chair Richards.
Yes.
Director Camacho.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Assemblymember Arembula.
Here.
Director Perea.
Here.
Director Gilmetti. Director Escutia. Director Williams.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. Director Cohen.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. If I could ask Director Camacho if you'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, if you'd please now advise the people in the audience and those who are calling in how they can address the board this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Before we begin the public comment for the High-Speed Rail Board of Directors meeting, I would like to go over some important information. For members of the public who have joined us in person and wish to provide public comment, you will be called on in the order you have received your card. If you are joining the meeting via Zoom and wish to provide public comment, please use the raise your hand feature located in the bottom of your screen. Or if you are dialing in by phone, pressing the number 2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called on in the order that their hands are raised. Once you're in the queue and your name is called, please click the prompt at the bottom of your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. If you are joining by phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you will hear a message that your phone is being unmuted. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes to speak. I will remind you when you have 15 seconds remaining. When it is your turn to speak, please slowly and clearly say your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you are representing. Mr. Chairman, we will begin with the in-person speakers. Our first speaker is Steve Roberts.
Good morning, Mr. Roberts.
Good morning, Chair and members of the.
I'll tell you what, we've been told that what you need to do, if you could, Mr. Roberts, is get it as close as you
Okay.
can to your mouth. Otherwise, you're
Yeah, it was off. It's off.
okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the High-Speed Rail Authority Board. My name is Steve Roberts. I'm president of the Rail Passenger Association of California. It's an all-volunteer statewide organization. Link Union Station, with its run-through tracks, was envisioned as a transformative project, especially critical for Metrolink in these times to become a regional rail network. But for over 40 years, we have watched the effort to build these run-through tracks at LA Union Station. There just seems to be a lack of political will that meant there were never enough resources, staff, funding to move this project forward in a timely manner. And intercity commuter rail and now high-speed rail just seem to be an afterthought with LA Metro. It is telling that this project that was so well developed and has such a huge geographical reach was not included in the 28 by 28 initiative. The failure to prioritize this project has resulted in delay and an endless cycle of budget shortfalls, redesign, construction inflation, then another budget shortfall, and on and on and on and on. The last redesign deleted the turnback connection and shortened the platforms, both of which limit operational flexibility. Southern California board members, this is your signature project. We cited it last year in the last year's funding discussions as being the key project. Central City hub stations are run-through tracks provide direct regional connectivity are the world standard of excellence. LA Metro needs to prioritize this project, identify resources, and get phase one completed for fully operational run-through tracks. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kurt Goddard.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
My name is Kurt Goddard. I'm with Atkins North America, Inc. I manage the rail and transit practice for Atkins here in the US. We're an international engineering company. We do high-speed rail all over the world, including HS2. We proposed on the rail systems engineering contract recently that was awarded to Network Rail. We protested that award. One of the core principles delivering this type of program is complete transparency, competitiveness, and fairness. And we feel that some of those procedures of California high-speed rail weren't followed correctly, in that there's an appearance of a conflict of interest with Network Rail, as they're currently working for WSP as a part of the PTP. Network Rail Consulting didn't disclose pertinent organizational conflict of information as a part of their submission on this contract, while involved in the project for nearly 7 years. Network Rail Consulting has an organizational conflict of interest as they remain active during the procurement period and could have had access to confidential information provided by our team. Network Rail Consulting statement of qualification submittal was non-compliant with the RFQ as they provided a response that was over the 50-page limit. Network Rail Consulting SOQ submittal was improperly scored, as we feel that those unnumbered pages were scored because those pages had a lot of information that they scored very high on. And how could that have been scored high when it should have been disregarded? It's our position that any of these 4 violations of policy in the RFQ process should have resulted in Network Rail's consultancy being disqualified.
15 seconds.
It's our position that the procurement has been unfair and non-competitive. We request that Network Rail Consulting be disqualified outright, and then Atkins, who scored second by less than a point, be awarded the contract. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, we will now move to the Zoom participants. Once again, if you're joining the meeting via Zoom and wish to provide public comment, please use the raise your hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. Or if you are dialing in by phone, press the number 2. This will raise your hand and put you into the queue.
Mr.
Speakers-
Chairman, if we could just during the CEO's report, get a response to that process question, not now, but later.
Oh.
The gentleman that just spoke, just Brian, during your report, if you just tell, okay, thank you.
Once again, when you're in the queue, you will be called on in the name, you will be called on in the order that you're entered the queue. Each speaker will be given 2 minutes. I will remind you when you have 15 seconds remaining. When it is your time to speak, please slowly and clearly say your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you're representing. Mr. Chair, our first speaker is Marvin Norman.
Good morning, Mr. Norman.
Good morning. My name is Marvin Norman. I'm a resident of San Bernardino and a member of RailPac. I just wanted to provide a few comments. I recently drove up to Sacramento and I took the 99, and I was glad to see the completed structures around Fresno. And I'm looking forward to when I will see them in the rest of the state as well. One thing I would like to point out and remember is I know that you folks are working hard on getting that construction done, the Bakersfield part done, and then the rest of phase 1. But I also would like to put in a word for getting early work done on the phase 2 sections that would come here through the Inland Empire, as we are doing lots of projects out here that could or would have significant impact on high-speed rail and would potentially benefit from coordination with high-speed rail. So hopefully you guys can, once you're done getting all of phase 1 environmentally cleared, you can immediately start work on the planning and environmental clearance work for phase 2 so that we could get those things all lined up and align all our efforts instead of having to undo so. And also would echo Mr. Roberts' comments about the Link US. It'd be good to see that project given the type of dignity it deserves so that we could get the a usable and world-class system out of it instead of something that is less than that. And finally, I did see that recently some grants were awarded to High Speed Rail, so glad to see that and hopefully keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kenneth Shiante.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Kenneth Shiotani, and I'm a senior staff attorney with the National Disability Rights Network. The National Disability Rights Network is the membership organization and training and technical assistance provider for the network of protection and advocacy programs that exist in every U.S. state and territory. The protection and advocacy programs provide legally based advocacy for people with disabilities on a full range of disability issues. I primarily work on ADA issues and have a particular interest in accessible transportation. Because of my interest and expertise, I've served as an alternative member of the U.S. Access Board's Rail Vehicle Accessibility Advisory Committee in 2014 and 2015. In recent years, I've been involved in providing input into new rail car procurements by Amtrak, the California Department of Transportation, the Illinois Department of Transportation, and the Connecticut Department of Transportation. I recently have taken part in meetings with consultants with the California High-Speed Rail Authority regarding the design and for the new cars for the high-speed rail service. I've been impressed by the fact that input from the disability community has been sought at what appears to be an early stage of the procurement process rather than after initial design decisions have been made and accessibility is then more of an afterthought than a design consideration. I've also been impressed that the consultants recently met with Kendra Muller from one of our members, Disability Rights California, and did a ride with her on the coaster train and the San Diego light rail to identify existing
15 seconds.
accessibility challenges and features on those cars. From what I understand at present, I think there's potential for the new high-speed rail cars to be a model for accessible rail cars for the future, for the world, if our input is continues to be accepted. So I've just been impressed with that.
Thank you very much, sir.
Our next speaker is Brian Yanti.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, members of the board and chair. My name is Brian Yanity. I am Vice President South of the Rail Passengers Association in California, or RailPAC. And I would like to echo what Mr. Roberts, President of RailPAC, said about Link Union Station. That project, I was hoping it would be open to show off to the world for the 2028 Olympics. And that really needs to move forward, and we don't want to cut too much of the good stuff out of it. Don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, despite cost overruns, because this is a project that'll last a century. We got to keep that in mind, or more. So, it's about legacy for future generations and not just our generation. And also want to echo Mr. Norman's comments about proceeding with phase 2 environmental. But I want to say a few things about the LA Anaheim project segment in the EIR. I was seeing here in the presentation, it'll be for later in the meeting today, about abandoning the Colton Intermodal Yard. The BNSF apparently is not interested in that anymore, or the High Speed Rail Authority does not want to be involved in that. But I think we need to address the Barstow International Gateway, which is in the Lenwood area, which the Lenwood staging tracks have been part of this EIR. And from what I gather from what BNSF has put out about the Barstow International Gateway, they're talking about short haul trains between that facility at Lenwood and the ports, or maybe Hobart or something. And if that is the case,
15 seconds.
freight rail electrification in the future needs to be looked at, because there could be a lot of potential for shared infrastructure of the electrification. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman, we have no other attendees that would like to provide public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to our agenda, but before we do that, they passed these out, or is anybody speaking to this, or is this foreign? I'd like to mention something before we get into the agenda. Director Perea and Director Dr. Arambula joined others yesterday and the day before in Fresno with regards to celebrating the RAISE grant that the authority received for the help to renovate the historic depot in Fresno. It was attended by the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration, Jennifer Mitchell. But it was a great event, and the purpose of this was this RAISE grant, this structure. Let me tell you about the structure. The structure, it was built initially in 1872, and it was built by the Central Pacific Railroad. It was later demolished. Originally, actually, it was up by the San Joaquin River, north of what has become Fresno. And when Leland Stanford was building the Central Pacific Railroad from Los Angeles, or excuse me, San Francisco through the Central Valley to Los Angeles, which sounds familiar. So as he came through, the station was substantially up at the north end of what is now the metropolitan area of Fresno. And he came across a farm that had, I think, maybe 2,000 acres of beautifully irrigated land in the middle of the desert, which was made possible by another pioneer, the Fresno area, that brought in canals. And so he decided at that moment that that the station needed to be their Central Pacific station needed to be moved south, also in farmland, and it was moved within a couple miles of the farm that he had looked at. And he saw this as the potential of the growth of an area and the importance of the agriculture to it. And so in 1889, after having sold Central Pacific to Southern Pacific, the depot was built, and it's a beautiful structure that's been added to and modified from time to time over the years, but it's been sitting vacant for a number of years since Union Pacific took over. The authority ended up buying that property. It's adjacent to where our Fresno, the first high-speed rail station is planned to be developed and built, and that's first station in the entire United States. So what happened is the management made application for a RAISE grant of $20 million. We received it, and with about another match of around 13 million or so, that's the estimated cost of the renovation, along with the park that will be built, that it will straddle the old the old depot and our new station. And it was just simply a great event, and the history of it also ties to one thing. When Leland Stanford moved the station, it was small wooden structure down to that site, it was in the same year that the city of Fresno became the city of Fresno. So we are renovating and taking care of the history for the community of Fresno on the most iconic building, and the actual building that we have all come to know over the years. It's the reason that for the growth of Fresno. It's where they move the population. It's where all the goods and services, agriculture in this instance, moved from the Central Valley, connected the region the state of California and in fact, the entire country. For not decades, for 200 years, 2 centuries, railroads have been moving people and goods and connecting them. And so this is the next step and the first step for high-speed rail. So it was a great day. We asked for more money, as you can imagine, but we were absolutely thrilled to what we got. And they were really, really very happy about it also. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
I wanted to appreciate the authority for submitting the application. It's always important for us to figure out how we can braid funding, and was impressive to see how many locals stood up and spoke about how transformative this investment will be. I was grateful to be there. The momentum that we're building, the state leaning in and supporting as well is a good sign of things to come, and do believe that the future is bright, both for Fresno and for high-speed rail.
Thank you, Joaquin. Anything, Henry? Okay. Brian, please also, where's Brian? Brian? Brian, please make sure that that your staff let them know how appreciative we are of what they did yesterday. Melissa, Tony, Meg, who I put on the spot in a way, but I knew she was the right person because they were asking about specifics of what we're going to do, and she made a blow-away presentation. So it was big for everybody. Thank you. Thank you. We will now, ladies and gentlemen, move into our agenda. Item number 1 is the May 11th board minute meetings. Do we have a motion for approval? A second? Motion and second, please call the roll.
Director Shank, Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho, Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea, Director Gilmetti, Director Escutia, Director Williams,
Yes.
Director Cohen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, the motion carries.
Before we start on item number 2, you will recall some time ago, towards the end of last year and beginning of this year, we took on looking into the organizational conflict of interest policy that the authority has, and that we asked Vice Chair Miller and Director Escutia to confer and work with management and staff on this. So this is the follow-up to that in the presentation that our old and very dear friend, Tom Filens, who, as many of you know, was our chief counsel for a number of years and decided to come out of retirement to be here with us today. So anyway, with that, Vice Chair Miller, do you want to introduce this beyond that?
I just want to thank my committee members, Martha Escutia. She was instrumental in assisting us in this and making many recommendations that were, I think, helped make this document more user-friendly. And also Laura Udon, who was a member of the BAC, who also assisted. So what you're seeing today has got the full committee recommendation. Go ahead, Tom, and thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Richards and board members, it's a pleasure to be here in front of you making this presentation. And we prepared a slide, PowerPoint presentation that, there it is. There's the first slide. Okay, so I just want to go over first the purpose of the existence of the policy. It was developed in order to comply with the federal grant agreements. Those agreements require the authority to maintain procedures for identifying and preventing real and apparent organizational conflicts of interest. And the policy is intended to ensure a fair and transparent procurement process, maximize competition, and minimize the risk of bid protests and litigations. And also, just will add that it is to have the contractors give us fair, unbiased help when they are under contract with us. So they have the interests of the authority in mind. The policy is based on state and federal procurement laws, court history and administrative decisions, and best practice guidelines from both FRA and FTA. And Caltrans also has an organizational conflict of interest policy that we used to help us guide the improvements to this recent amendment. Next slide. The history of the policy and the amendments, the policy was created in 2011, and the reason again for the policy was to comply with the grant agreements. The authority was awarded the grants that they have in the Central Valley, the ERA grant and the FY10 grant in 2010. So then following that, we took the task of putting together these organizational conflict of interest policies. And with outside counsel and the legal division at the time, we put together the original policy. And at that time, we did request and received stakeholder input, and there was a public comment period. And then it was amended again in November of 2020, again with stakeholder input to address the evolving nature of the high-speed rail program at the time. And now in late 2022, as Vice Chair Miller has mentioned, we had a board committee assist us, and I'd just like to say they were very helpful and guiding us through, and we really appreciate, the legal division really appreciates all the help we got from Vice Chair Miller and Board Member Escutia. So here we are once again undertaking the amendment to the policy. Next slide. And I think we've covered some of this through your introduction, Tom, and your comments, Board Member Miller. But the subcommittee was formed to direct the process. We met and reviewed the draft together with the committee, and they directed us to put a public comment together period for 2 months from December 21st to February 21st. And we put it on the website and invited the public to give us comments on the policy. And the draft policy was also sent to the Business Advisory Committee on January 13th, 2023. And the staff presented the policy to the BAC on January 25th, 2023, and invited them to make comments as well. Next slide. This is a summary of what the proposed changes are from the policy that had previously been in place. We lessened the focus on design build contracting structure and broadened the methods, broadened it to address methods of delivery other than design build. And we condensed some of the sections to do that. We'd clarified that potential bidders should be identifying potential conflicts of interest related to oversight of the work of other entities on the high-speed rail project if the contractor has a financial relationship with those entities on projects outside the authority's program. And we did have that occur at one time, and the board looked into this aspect of having potential conflict for work outside of the authority. And so now we've incorporated that requirement in the policy. We also clarified the proposals include both statements of qualifications and bids. It had just focused on the word bid before, but often these procurements that we put out are statements of qualifications that are submitted. We also improved the definition of regional consultants by incorporating engineering and environmental consultants in that definition, which in fact, they are involved in the environmental process because they take the project through a design phase of 15 to 30% as part of the environmental process. We also made a clear description of the process for seeking an organizational conflict of interest determination, because some of the comments we got back from those that provided comments was that maybe there should be a little more clarity for the process that is necessary to make that determination. We also had a statement that the responsibility for determining an actual or apparent conflict rests with the authority, not the entity seeking the determination. It's the authority that needs to make that decision. So we made that very clear in the amendments. We also have additional factors that we included that we will consider when the bidder performs the work on multiple contracts. We updated hypotheticals, which we had at the end, which were not exactly part of the policy itself, but are there to assist those that are seeking a determination as a guidance of the information, the type of information that they may want to provide us and the types of scenarios that we might look at with that information. So we updated those to match recent conflict examples. We've been in the legal division performing a lot of determinations in recent times. And so we had a lot of examples, and it was a good opportunity for us to incorporate some of those examples that were actual determinations we made into these hypotheticals. And then there was also, as part of the comments, some confusion about this compatibility matrix that we had at the end of the policy. And so we've removed that matrix. We felt it created confusion at this time at least. Next slide. Sure. Okay, sure. There's a matrix at the end, or not, and it shows some a chart that what the contract is, and if you had another contract in another axis, you could compare them to see whether it would perhaps lead to a conflict if you had both contracts, because it's really about multiple contracts. And that matrix seemed to be confusing to some, but you'll see as a next slide, we're still considering, or next couple slides, we're still going to be considering updating that matrix, but I think we just needed a little more time to take a look at it and also determine whether that was worth keeping and whether it is helpful and doesn't lead to any confusion.
If I could just add, Tom,
Mhm.
when we removed that, we also at a prior board meeting had directed staff to attend pre-award construction meetings with lawyers to answer conflict questions, and then to have kind of a help desk where you could call if you had questions, because the matrix was confusing. So we're trying to work on that. There were some inconsistencies in it, but the biggest thing was we were available to help you solve a problem before the bid occurs. So there's something there that they can ask questions.
And another thing that we noticed is some of the contracts that were referenced in the matrix itself wasn't inclusive of all the types of contracts we have today, because this was originally put together in 2011. So the program has changed quite a bit. And so I think it's an opportunity to improve on that. So we're looking at that for future inclusion. And it wouldn't be the policy itself that we would need to renew, but instead it would be an additional document that would have for reference. I think the previous slide. I didn't finish the previous slide. Maybe go back one. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So the actions we agreed upon in consultation with the board committee in response to comments that we received is we're going to develop a checklist for the participants in the procurement, which includes a time estimate for the authority to respond to organizational conflict of interest determination requests. And the checklist and timeline will be included in the future procurement documents. We also are going to have information for each procurement posted on the website, which would include information about the authority's policy, including a checklist and a timeline. The authority is going to require a statement signed under penalty of perjury by the firm executive who wants to compete in our contract competition, that the firm considered the policy and performed conflicts checks prior to submitting its bid or statement of qualifications. We also are going to have procurement documents that will include the requirement that contractors self-certify annually that required organizational conflict of interest mitigations are in place. Sometimes we require those mitigations to be in place. So that would be part of this self-certification if that in fact was a requirement that we required of them. And that the authority contract managers will enforce this requirement of conflict mitigations. Those mitigations, the legal division determines need to be made, and we work with the contract managers within the organization to make sure they understand what those mitigations are, and they monitor whether those are whether they're in place, and they'll enforce this requirement in the contract. The contract managers will continue to provide oversight for mitigations required after the organizational conflict of interest determination. And finally, the authority will consider developing a new matrix, as I just mentioned, to assist the stakeholders. And so we're going to be looking at that as well. And it will be a standalone document that would be posted on the website. Next. So the recommendation to the board is that the amended organizational conflict of interest policy be accepted by the board for use from the date of acceptance forward. So thank you so much for listening
Tom?
to the presentation, and
I
any
have a
questions?
question.
Sure.
The conflict of interest has, as I understand it, we have two ways of asking the question for conflict. And that is for a proposer might request or ask the agency whether or not they are conflicted. Secondly, when they submit proposals, we're mandating that they disclose any potential, they may be not, but so does that necessarily relieve them of the responsibility of listing that on a proposal because they got a clearance, 2 or 3 months prior to that? You understand what I'm saying?
Well, the companies, as you know, are dynamic in the engagements that they take on. And sometimes new work that they could take on might create a potential conflict that didn't exist when they put their procurement together. So it's dynamic. One of the blind spots that we have in the authority and the legal division is we don't really know what the businesses that are competing for our contracts are engaged in. So it's really with their help and responsibility, we can make those determinations. So they need to continue to keep us informed if things change on their side. So I think to answer your question is it's very possible that there would be an obligation for them to reach out and ask for another determination based on changed facts. At the same time, they can rely on our determination if facts haven't changed, because we've gone through and consulted with them. We have been making quite an effort to reach out and meet with those that want to through Zoom calls and the like. So does that answer your question?
Yes, I guess the point is, and if I understand you correctly, is there an undue reliance on the initial inquiry back to the agency that they're asking whether or not they may have a potential conflict? And if the agency says, no, we don't believe it to be, and when they submit, then they don't have to comply with that portion of the RFP, which would be, they have to list everything that potentially could be. There's a conflict there.
I think we're speaking of, I think it was called the Form D, Ernie.
Yeah.
They submit, and I think I would love to go back and look at that and provide it to you, just to make sure we get this answer correct. But I think Tom's point is well taken. Every response we ever give, every determination always ends with, this is based on the facts provided to us at this point in time. If at any point, even if they've been our contractor for 2-3 years, anything new comes up, they have to come back and do another one on the determination side. But let me find out the answer for you on the Form D side. I understand where you're going.
And then I think I got an answer earlier. There's also a pending bill at the legislature, AB 344, which is dealing with how the state is going to view conflict of interest. And as I understand it, there is no conflict between what the state is proposing by law versus what we have, correct?
I mean, that's correct. So this is just proposed legislation, but were it to pass in its current state, we don't see a conflict with either the old policy or the one we're proposing to amend today.
So the board should be aware of that.
Absolutely. And
thank
we'll
you.
keep
And I-
tracking legislation always to make
Yeah,
sure. we
and I'll
can-
make one more point on your original question. If circumstances changed and there appeared to be a potential conflict or was a conflict in the procurement process or after a contract's awarded, we certainly would work with the contractor to see if those conflicts can be mitigated completely. And so, it's a continuous back and forth with the contractors and the authority to make sure there are no conflicts. And it's similar to the FEPC has conflict requirements as well. And so the status of anyone's personal financial situation can change. And so it's that individual's obligation, if they're in a position that the FEPC laws apply to them, to continue to monitor and understand whether something's changed to create a conflict and whether it can be mitigated.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions or comments from any members of the board?
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion for approval by Director Camacho. Is there a second? By Director Schenk. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk, Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Gilmetti, Director Escutia, Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Cohen.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Flens. Thank you very much. And Alicia, thank you for your oversight through this whole process also. Yes, Director Schenk.
I may just thank you to Vice Chair Miller and Director Scutia for doing this. It took a lot of work and brought us to an important place of consensus. So thank you very much.
It's truly a job well done. Thank you, Vice Chair Miller, and for Director Escutia out there. Anyway, thank you very much. And we'll now move on to item number 3, which is the independent review audit. Director, our internal audit manager, our director, Paula Rivera. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Richards, board members. I'm Paula Rivera. I'm with the Authority Audit Office. And I bring to you today the results of an external peer review that we had. We've undergone this external peer review. It was performed by the California Association of State Auditors, which is audit managers from other departments review each other's internal control systems and compliance with those internal control systems. The audit standards require that we make the results of our peer review available to the public and present the results to the board. In accordance with government auditing standards and the international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing, the chief audit executive must develop and maintain a quality assurance and improvement program. The audit office's quality assurance and improvement program includes staff receiving adequate training related to audit standards, internal processes and practices documented in an audit manual, 2 levels of review for each audit assignment, an annual internal quality assurance review, and an external peer review, at least every 3 years. This year's external peer review team was comprised of auditors at the supervisory and management level from the Department of Transportation, the Franchise Tax Board, and the California Lottery. The peer reviewers found that our internal quality control system was suitably designed and operating effectively to provide reasonable assurance of compliance with the standards. The external peer reviewers had 1 observation, which was documented in the management letter, and their recommendation was to document the assessment of the audit team's overall competency during audit planning. We have internal conversations about the auditors to assign to a particular audit. We just weren't documenting those conversations. The audit standards require that we do, and we've updated our procedures to be documenting that in our planning. Are there any questions?
By the, yes, yes.
Thank you for this and congratulations on, I guess not congratulations, but you're not supposed to be congratulated for what you're supposed to do and you're doing what you're supposed to do. So thank you for that. I did just want to drill down just a little bit on that. When you say you have conversations, just for my own, because what I read, I think it's clear, but from my brain, I just wanted to hear just a little bit more detail about when you're having those conversations, you are assessing the competency of the auditors and their involvement in the audit. And it just wasn't clear what the nature of those conversations were. I mean, are you asking them, are you not asking, but are you, evaluating their qualifications to the degree that is necessary for that particular audit? I guess that's the
Yes.
question. Okay.
Yes.
I just
So
want to
when-
make sure that's on the record. Yeah.
Yes. When we have an audit coming up, we have a managers meeting. The 3 senior managers and I will decide which auditors to assign. Not every auditor needs to have the entire amount of competencies, but the team as a whole needs to be competent to perform the audit. And as I mentioned, we have lots of conversation about who we're going to assign, but now to comply with the audit standards, we document those conversations and those decisions as part of our planning.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Director Schenk.
Paula, this question would ordinarily in a public company be asked in executive session, but we don't do that. So we'll ask Brian to plug his ears. I just due diligence here. Do you have the resources that you need to do the audits? And do you have the cooperation that you need from management and staff?
Yes, we do.
Thank you,
Don't
Director
plug your
Schenk.
ears, Brian.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I would only then just report briefly to my colleagues. When this occurs, in each instance that it has occurred, I end up being interviewed by the auditors and have the opportunity also to ask questions. So, and that's just with the auditors. In this instance, it was a Zoom call. And it's always been very interesting. And I've always asked them some very direct questions that we would normally do in a closed session in a private sector board. But I guess it's beyond fair to state that we stand very high among our peers in terms of the audit reviews that have been done and have been done. And they're always done by different groups of people, but it's been pretty consistent. So, I mean, I've always congratulated Paula and her leadership in this internal review, our committee, our internal audit committee. And I think it's well deserved. And I didn't hear anything this year that would cause me to say anything different to you. So I think it was also, it's very, very positively reported. And I think I'm more than able to say that to you because it's true. But anyway, thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you.
That is an information item. We'll now move on to item number 4, and this one is an action item, and this is with regards to the audit plan.
So part of our internal quality assurance system is that each year that we don't have an external peer review, we have auditors who internally look to see if our quality assurance system is working. They review work papers, they look at the documentation that we have. And so I bring that today to you for your information to show that we're in compliance with our internal quality assurance program. I also bring our audit plan. The audit plan is a risk-based audit plan identifying priorities for our audit activities. In order to develop the audit plan, audit topics were solicited from executive management and the Finance and Audit Committee members. So the plan has 5 audits listed on it. 3 audits are activities that we have in progress. Incurred cost contract compliance audits, audit of small business, and pre-award evaluations.
How do you determine the number of hours? See, I see you have 2 categories. You have 1,500 hours.
For the audits that we have in progress, the hours, once we've decided on our objectives, then we look at sort of the scope of what our audit will be, and then we can define what the hours are. When the others that we're proposing, like the civil work certification, that's best on our base estimate ahead of time. Once we get in and define the objectives, we may, or if we add additional staff, we think we're going to have 2 and we have 3, then we'll refine that once we get into the planning process.
I asked that only for, question I asked during the Finance and Audit Committee meeting was the goal setting process and our inability to reach those goals. And that's part of the audit that, as I read your scope here, is including recruitment, contracting, good faith efforts. Maybe if we spent more time looking at those areas, why they're not really reaching those goals. As Brian said, that we reach it in professional services, but we may not be reaching it in the other areas. Maybe, it needs more attention to that, so we can come back with some recommendations as to what we're missing. I've never, in the 5 or 6 years that I've been on this board, I've never heard a recommendation as to how we could be doing better. I just hear that we're stagnant or we're static in terms of the percentages that we're using minority and small businesses, which has been about 22 to 23%. So I'm just wondering whether or not there's a better job that we can be doing, and if we could get recommendations from an audit team that suggests maybe you were deficient in one area and we could be improving those areas.
Okay, that's one of our objectives, is to meet with prime consultants who have the small business requirement in their contracts to understand what efforts are being performed. Do you have documentation of your good faith efforts? You've looked, and the type of work that you do, there just aren't a sufficient number of, say, disabled veterans business enterprises maybe. So the documentation that the primes retain will be key to our understanding as to why the goals aren't being met.
Thank you.
Just as a follow-up to that question, would you be meeting with disadvantaged potential contractors and disabled veterans, potential contractors as well, to ask that same question?
We certainly can. We haven't developed our testing plan yet. But
Well, only to get to the question, which is how can we increase the percentage? That might be also helpful to ask the actual contractors themselves.
okay, I agree.
What do
Thank
you think?
Okay,
I was
thank
looking
you.
at
Any
the-
other questions for Paula? Hearing none, colleagues, this is an action item to approve the 23-24 internal audit plan. So do we have a motion for approval?
Move.
Vice Chair Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Director Williams, thank you. Please call the roll.
Director Schenk, Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Camacho, Vice Chair Miller,
Yes.
Director Perea, Director Gilmetti, Director Escutia, Director Williams,
Aye.
Director Cohen.
Yes.
Thank you. That's passed then, and Ms. Rivera, thank you very much as always. Okay. The rest of our agenda, as you see, is all informational. So moving on to item number 5 is the train interior design briefing, and Mr. Kelly is going to make a couple quick comments at the outset.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bruce Armistead, who's the head of our rail operations division, and Melissa Figueroa, who you're all familiar with, the head of our strategic communications group, will present on this item. But just to tell you why it's before the board now, we are, as we move toward getting into operations, coming soon on the horizon is the need to move forward on train procurements, purchasing the rolling stock. And one of the things we learned on our trip to Germany in September of 2022 was work Deutsche Bahn was doing there in upgrading their rolling stock, their train system. They had started a deep engagement with the public on what amenities were important for train riders. How are they complying with disability needs and requirements, as well as security issues and other things that are important on the train. So I love the idea of this early public engagement. And you heard, I think many of you heard the public comment from the gentleman who called earlier from the National Disability Group, who, again, understanding what those needs are as we start the specifications for the train manufacturing is a very important step. So for the next several months, we'll be continuing this dialogue, getting feedback from the public and groups that ride trains. And they will work their way into the specifications of what we do as we order the rolling stock. So this is something you'll probably hear more and more about as we go forward, because there will be continuous engagement with the public on this topic. We'll be coming back to the board. I'll touch on this in the CEO report. We're coming back to the board later in 2023 to get qualifications going on train procurement, because that's a long lead item. So we'll be coming back on that. But I just wanted to tell you why you're seeing this today. It's as we get closer and closer to rolling stock, we want to make sure that we're incorporating all the right elements on the trains that we're having built. So with that, Bruce, I'll let you take it from there. Thank you.
Morning. Before I get started, I want to introduce Gerline Beaupary. He's come to us from Caltrans Division of Rail, and he's going to be helping out with the train sets procurement. He has a wealth of experience buying trains for the state of California. So having him on our team here at the Rail Group with the High Speed Rail Authority is a definite plus. I'd also like to acknowledge the early train operator who's helping us with the effort of designing the interiors. That's one of their contractual obligations. And with that, I'm pleased to update the board on the progress of the ongoing project to design the interiors for the future California high-speed rail train sets. The authority has set out on this project earlier this year with the objective of providing an onboard passenger experience that will be transformational for high-speed rail travel, as the project will be for California, setting a new global benchmark. We are starting the design process to be ready for the procurement process for the initial train sets required for the Central Valley service. Okay. I'll lean in. The design concepts and guidelines that are currently being developed will be included in the request for proposals for train sets alongside the functional and technical requirements. They will provide guidance for the train set manufacturers regarding the onboard experience that the state of California envisions for the first real high-speed trains in the nation. The design will be fully compliant with federal and state regulations for high-speed trains and exceed standards that have been set for the US and worldwide. Stakeholder and public engagement, the interior design process is also a great opportunity to involve stakeholders and the people of California in the high-speed rail project. A central piece of our interior design process is collecting inputs and feedback throughout the project. We are deeply invested in ensuring a barrier-free design that provides the best experience for all passengers, which means involving potential future riders and those who have a stake in the project to gain their support. And at the same time, the outreach and engagement that is happening as part of the design process allows us to showcase progress of the high-speed rail project and provide a preview of what to expect of the future service to the public. And Melissa will speak more about that later. Custom best-in-class interior design. The result of our design will be a unique interior concept that incorporates inputs of Californians across the state into a best-in-class design for high-speed trains operating in California. We have some major goals for 2023 and are proud that we are on track to achieve those goals by the end of the year. We'll speak more about those goals and the outlook for upcoming years, but ultimately, our focus now is to create a qualitative outputs in 2023 so that we can develop and showcase an interior mock-up that will not only preview the future service across the state, but also generate public excitement, awareness about the future of the high-speed rail in the state of California and in the United States. Next slide, please. We have defined 3 guiding principles that will shape the standards for California's first high-speed rail service. The first principle is state-of-the-art design. We want to create a design that exceeds standards and will get people excited about the first high-speed train. This means incorporating best practices in transportation from around the world, including innovations in technology and materials into our design. Global benchmarks will be further developed and customized to ensure that the next level design meets the requirements of ADA and Buy America. The central principle that guides our design discussions is always to think of from the perspective of future riders. Through research, outreach, and user testing, we gain deep understanding of the passenger needs, the passenger wants, and the wows of their journey, or what will really excite them to ride the future high-speed rail. These needs, wants, and wows will all be incorporated through elements of the interior design to create an experience that all future riders will enjoy. Lastly, we're aware that the train sets that are being procured will have a long in-service life. So we will make sure that the interior design of the train set is resilient to any challenges throughout its life cycle. This means planning for longevity through modular concepts, flexible spaces, durable materials, and easily maintainable and recyclable materials. We want the design not only to be an icon for high-speed rail, but a lasting one. Next slide, please. Our roadmap for the interior design and the procurement process extends from 2020 to the end of 2030. We began the interior design in 2020 when we developed the first conceptual renderings of the train set interior based on input from future riders and draft functional and technical requirements for the interior. You may have seen some of these conceptual renderings in the PER for 2023, online, or at our outreach events. We have noticed that these renderings have helped to generate a lot of excitement about the future of high-speed rail as they gave future passengers more of a tangible glimpse into what the experience might look like. This year, we begin the actual design project. So far, this has been a highly collaborative project between the authority, California communities, and key stakeholders to develop a unique interior that is designed for passengers of all ages, abilities, and demographics. We'll review some of the stakeholder outreach shortly. In early 2024, we will finalize the design guidelines for the train set interiors, as well as the functional and technical requirements, which will inform the train set procurement. From 2024 to 2030, we'll be bringing the designs into reality, getting trains on the tracks. During this time, we will procure and deliver 2 prototype train sets, which will be ready for testing. The testing and commissioning will take place on the 119-mile test track through the Central Valley. The Central Valley operations on the initial operating segment will commence between 2030, 2033. And as you can see, we have an ambitious timeline ahead. And we'd like to share details on the next steps with you, diving a bit deeper into the essentials of the interior design process during the coming months. And I'd like to turn it over to Melissa to take the remainder of the.
Good morning, board members. My name is Melissa Figueroa. I'm the Chief of Strategic Communications for the authority. And in coordination with Bruce's team and Deutsche Bahn, we have the great pleasure of talking to the community about the interiors of the trains and our outreach events. And that's something that our team is just thrilled to be doing at this point. I can't stress enough how excited they were to gather in Sacramento just a couple of months ago, hear all about the work that we're doing and get out into the communities and start gathering this feedback and bring it back to all of you. I want to highlight the fact that the strength of California is its diversity. And that diversity is what's leading us to having the best train sets in the nation and the first train sets in the nation. And that's something that our team is taking very seriously. We are working to connect California through inclusive design. You heard a mention of the ADA community. We're also reaching out to the multilingual community. Communities up and down the state of California, a 500-mile long system. You're going to hear from every community, every ethnicity, every walk of life. And we are really listening to those people because they are our future riders. So we've started that process already, and we've been in the communities. We've attended conferences like SCAG in Southern California and gotten some really meaningful feedback that even Deutsche Bahn has commented is different than the feedback that they receive when they're designing train sets in Europe. And that just speaks to the diversity of our state of California. So this is the start of the process. By no means is this the end of this iterative process. We are just now getting out there with all this information and starting to collect feedback. And throughout the next 12 or so months, we're going to continue reaching out to these communities and continue to get their feedback as the designs evolve. So they'll start at a very basic level. They're called white mock-ups. They're made with cardboard, very basic elements. And we're going to be designing those here in California, here in Sacramento, so we can take all of you, we can take members of the public, our stakeholder community, members of the legislature through to see the process as it's evolving. And these stakeholders will be part of it too. We want to continue to get their feedback as this is going on. If we can go to the next slide. So what will happen from there is we will have a more detailed design moving through the process. Ultimately, it will be what's called a high fidelity mock-up, which will look and feel like a real train set interior. You can get inside of it, you can touch it, you can see the fabric, you can see what amenities, where the USB ports will be. This is very important to a lot of our future riders, as you can imagine. Wi-Fi on trains is very important. Everything from the width of the aisles, the fabric on the seats, where the plugs are located, legroom. Yes, Mr. Kelly will make sure there's plenty of legroom. We know this is very important. Even things like, we know that families are not always just a 3-person family, a 4-person family. Some families are larger, mine included. So we've heard a lot, even from our 5th graders that we spoke with not too long ago. You know, I have a family of 5 or 6. Are you going to have seats that, you know, all my family can sit together and we're not spread apart all over the train? And that is feedback that we're taking into account as we're designing the seat configuration within the trains. Also areas for children to play and stretch their legs, for our elderly passengers to have quiet space. They don't necessarily want to be around the 5-year-old children. We understand that. Folks from the autism community have special needs. We're listening to them too. So this is all being taken into account as we work through this process. And then ultimately, like I said, we'll have this high fidelity mock-up that we are very much looking forward to taking around the state and showing folks what this is going to look like for the state of California, because we recognize not everyone can come here to Sacramento to see it. So we're going to try and find a way to do a bit of a road show and take that on the road to show our public what our trains will look like. If we can go to the next slide. So just to summarize a little bit, and what Bruce was touching on earlier, of course, mobility, sustainability, and equity are the core of what we're trying to do here in the state of California. We look forward to your feedback. We look forward to the public's feedback. We very much acknowledge that this is a diverse state and we want to hear all perspectives. In the back of the room on your way out, I would encourage you to take a look at the poster that we brought. It's just a small sampling of some of the feedback that we've received and the different personas that we're listening to. By no means is it fully representative. It's just a small example I wanted to show you on your way out today of what we're working on as a team. So I think with that, I believe that was our last slide. And Bruce and I are happy to answer any questions.
Chairman.
Yes, Director Shank.
Thanks, Melissa.
Of
That's
course.
very exciting. This
It
is,
is.
this is it. Um, Many years ago, I had the ICE train come and they did a run from San Diego to LA and it was wonderful. With all of the stakeholders, are members of this board going to be able to give input? Because some of us are
100%.
train road warriors.
Yes, we value your input. And I know that we have been talking about that with Deutsche Bahn and with Bruce's team. At what point we want to start involving you, because we don't want to take up too much of your time too early in the process and feel.
Oh,
like it's
on this,
wasteful,
take it
so
up.
Take it up. We're going to
We
take you
are.
up on that then.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Excellent report.
Director Williams.
Thank you. I had a question for Mr. Armistead. Just looking at the schedule, and you mentioned that this is in some ways an ambitious timeline. We are obviously thinking a lot about making sure we're promising and delivering, right? In
Yes.
terms of those schedules. So I just was curious to know whether what are some of the, and I understand that this kind of tracks to the PUR and our plans to obviously, get the project to operational level. What are some of the risks specifically with respect to the train set procurement that you see or are thinking about anticipating so that we can kind of mitigate those risks and stay on schedule?
Primarily, it's the testing and commissioning of the train set. As you may have heard, Amtrak is going through a number of challenges with the train sets they're testing and commissioning on the East Coast. So we're learning, we have a constant dialogue with Amtrak and the FRA on the testing and commissioning process. So we're learning from their mistakes. And we have our dedicated test track. And one of the challenges they have is they're trying to test on a revenue railroad. So with a revenue railroad, you have to find your times and you can only do it at night or when off service hours. So testing and commissioning, we'll have a dedicated test track. That's a mitigation that is natural for us. Another challenge is making sure that all the proposers can meet both Buy America and the standards for 220-mile-an-hour trains. There are a lot of electric train sets out there, but they don't go 220. There are a select few that go 220. So making sure that they can meet our requirements is a risk because it limits the field of proposers. And hopefully in the very near future, we will be coming back to you with an RFQ that will show us the world of people who can meet our requirements. But Buy America, 220 miles an hour, testing and commissioning are the primary risks.
If I could just add that one of the things we've asked the federal government for in our federal state grant application is funding directly for trains, for train procurement. So as that is pending, and we think we'll hear on that by the end of the year, we do want to start the process of qualifying vendors. So by the time a decision is made on that, we'll know who we've qualified, who can manufacture the trains we're looking for. So that's something we'll come back to you guys on very, very shortly.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Director Perea.
Yeah, a couple of questions for you. The first is the train sets that we all have written on around the world. I've been on Spain's train set. I know all of you have been on others. What is it in this process are we going to find different than what these folks in different countries have already thought of and then put into practice? What's going to be different?
We're trying to stick with service proven train sets.
Right.
So I hope there shouldn't be a lot different. Our interiors will be different because our interiors will be informed by our market and our demographic, as opposed to their interiors being informed by their market and demographic. So that'll be a difference that you'll see and feel inside the train set.
I'm just curious, what does that mean? I mean, are there the body shapes different or?
Yeah, well, the interior design.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Sure. Some of the early feedback we're receiving in California, we are very much a farm to fork state. So we're hearing a lot about the food choices within the trains and should it be California specific? Should we have seats and configurations of 4 or 6? Should there be tables? Should there be standing space? Should there be an area dedicated for children's play, like a play area, playground type of area within a train? We're also hearing a lot about individual spaces for meetings. So if you're a traveler, but you're doing business on the train and you need to conduct a meeting in a private space and take a phone call that you don't want the entirety of the train to hear, is there space for you to sit and perhaps close the door so that you can have those conversations privately? Or is it a larger gathering of a meeting? You know, you're gonna have folks from the Silicon Valley heading all the way down to the Central Valley. You know, perhaps there's some meetings that need to occur in more of a boardroom style setting. Those are all scenarios we're considering as well.
Okay. And then in the end, will whatever is developed be then criteria that bidders will have to incorporate into their bids?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
The other
Then-
thing, Henry, that just might be a slightly different thing is ADA requirements here and in America are different than internationally. So I think,
Exactly. No,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, public safety, and we've done a lot of conversations with the Highway Patrol and taken into account some of their recommendations for safety on the trains as well.
Mhm.
So those are things that we're taking very seriously as well as we're
Okay.
designing.
But the other question on the timeline on page 4. So the more aggressive schedule of 10 years from now, the outset is 2033 to have the train sets ready for testing. Can you tell me or talk about the track and systems procurement? Because obviously to put a train set on, you have to have our track and systems in. What's happening there? I know we're going to do it in pieces now, but
Yeah,
what?
Henry, I'm going to touch on some of that in my CEO report,
Yeah.
but just so you're aware that we are proposing to come back to the board with a series of procurements in the next 3 or 4 months, one after the other, to start the track procurement, start the design of the track, get the train manufacturers qualified,
Okay.
come back with the systems procurement. These are all lining up, and what you'll hear me say in the CEO report is I'm giving you a sense of what's ahead. Bruce and Bill Casey will likely come back in the July meeting and talk to you guys specifically about lessons learned from the prior procurements of what we're applying to these going forward, as well as a month-by-month schedule of what we'll be bringing you on the procurement front to make sure we're staying on schedule. That's in
Okay.
the project update report.
And do we have the funding right now for I understand the train sets, we're looking for federal grants for that.
We are looking for federal grants for the train sets. We are, we're funded certainly for the 119. I think our grant application request that's pending includes the ability of us to start some of the extended work for the Merced extensions and Bakersfield extensions, like right-of-way procurement and moving utilities, which we want to make sure we're doing in the right order as we go forward. And so those are part of the grant application that are also pending. But again, the timing of this stuff is fair right now for us because we are going to know by the end of 23 what the answer is to our grant application at the federal level. And if we see that green light, we're gonna move forward aggressively on this stuff. So
And do we have the money for the track and systems? We
certainly do for the 119-mile stretch. And
we
again,
have
the
that money.
171, we need the federal partnership, which we've been
Okay.
clear on in our application.
The last question, the train sets are going to be procured, manufactured, and delivered for testing in the Central Valley. I know we don't know who is going to be selected, but where will they be manufactured? In the United States or in the country that we select?
We're going to be Buy America compliant.
By America. So they will be procured and manufactured in the United States.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Do we know where in the United States?
No.
Depends who the supplier is.
Right.
So for example, Henry, Siemens has a plant here in Sacramento. They're hoping to get more high-speed rail business, but Siemens is one manufacturer here. The entity who is manufacturing high-speed trains now, electrified trains is Alstom, who is located in Rochester, New York. And so they're another domestic manufacturer. I think it's important to know that whether you're building an electrified high-speed train now or not in America, not every single component of that train is manufactured in the United States. There are components that come over and get assembled here. That'll be true with us going forward. And I think the thing that we have the opportunity to do is increase that domestic supply sooner. And that's part of the Buy America stuff that we're working with the FRA on, as well as Brightline.
So I don't know who's say connected to the New York firm, but for example, that wouldn't exclude, say, Spain or Japan as one example from being the successful awardee, if they could somehow assemble their trains somewhere in the United States? Is that?
As long as they have to meet the Buy America
Right,
requirements.
right. It gets real
Got it.
complicated with the definition of component, and subcomponent, and how you meet the Buy America requirements. So it gets real complicated.
Okay,
I don't mean to be evasive, but Buy America compliance is what we have.
And just to provide an example of the complexity, the Federal Railroad Administration has begun a dialogue with, both Brightline and the authority and others about what's the long-term plan for domestic supply of these things, recognizing that they're not all domestically supplied today. And so that's an engagement we're in with them that'll be ongoing for a while.
Okay, Henry? Yes, Emily?
Oh, just along those same lines, page 4 says procurement of the initial train sets, 2024 to 2030. Between procurement, manufacturing, and delivered for testing in the Central Valley, fulfilling Buy America requirements. Can you give us a sense of which portion of that Buy America puts a hurdle in front of us for the most, or in the most unique way?
Well, the experience of Amtrak has been they had to apply for waivers for certain pieces, the glazing, bogies, and some braking equipment and a few other things. So those are the pieces that will give us challenges. But as Mr. Kelly alluded to, we have a sourcing plan that we're talking with the FRA about in order to try and build up that capacity here in this country and have a technology transfer that would allow some of those components to be built here. Of course, it takes time because and we need a market for high-speed trains. If there's no market, people won't invest millions of dollars into a plant that makes high-speed braking sets or high-speed windshields or car body shells if they're only going to deliver 10 of them.
Along those lines, I think I've mentioned this before in a public setting, but we both and Brightline have applied for federal funding for the program, and both of us are interested in funding 4 trains. And I think there's an opportunity for the two of us to work with the FRA on how we can implement and execute that together in a way that would meet the Buy America requirements more quickly, and also get certain efficiencies and economy of scale on how we do this. So there could be, for example, there could be a joint procurement that we would engage in with. We're not there yet, but these are some of the strategies that are before us that I think the FRA will have something to say about as we go forward.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Armistead, Ms. Figueroa, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, and we'll now move on to the Southern California update.
Good morning. I am LaDonna DiCamillo.
Welcome.
I'm the Regional Director for Southern California, and I'm happy to be here to let you know what's happening in Southern California. So we'll dive right in. Southern California covers 164 miles. We have 4 project sections from Bakersfield to Anaheim. I'm going to touch on each section and what's happening in each section and do a deeper dive in the Los Angeles to Anaheim project section area. So we'll start at the top. We're working north to south, but we cover a wide range of geographic territory and including the agricultural areas, Bakersfield to Palmdale. So reminder that we completed our rod nod in 2021 for Bakersfield to Palmdale, and we're very excited about that. Next slide talks a little bit where this particular project section is one that is included in the federal state partnership grant application number 2. And we're very excited about the opportunity to move to the next step, which would be advanced design, particularly the geotechnical studies that are needed in and around the Tehachapi Mountains. That is included in application 2 of our Fed state that also includes San Jose to Merced. And we got a lot of support for that grant application from that Bakersfield to Palmdale, those constituents there. So we're excited about that potential opportunity, and I understand we'll find out later this year as to how that will proceed. Moving further south, the next slide, we'll take a pause at the Palmdale station. We are doing some work with Meg Cedoroff's team to plan in and around the Palmdale station. Next slide. Our goals, well, I'll remind everyone that Palmdale Station was included in the Bakersfield to Palmdale EIR, environmental work. And so we do have a record of decision, notice of determination on that. But our goal is to work with the city for preservation and long-term planning of how to envision that station. And we have been working with the city. We've held a number of workshops. We've actually held 5 workshops to develop a common goal and a partnership there for a master plan. And in fact, our last workshop was to lay the foundation for a new memorandum of understanding that will better, we think, better prepare us for grant opportunities in the future. So there is some work going on there at that Palmdale station. Next slide. Moving further south into our Palmdale to Burbank project section, that draft environmental document was released late last year, and the comment period closed December 1st. We have selected a preferred alternative. We're actually carrying 6 alternatives forward, and we've selected a preferred alternative, which is referred to as SR 14A because it kind of parallels State Route 14. It is 28 miles of tunneling. We expect to release our final environmental document later this year. Next slide. We've done a number of outreach meetings for that environmental document release. These are listed here. We were kind of in a COVID wasn't quite done time period. So we had a hybrid of virtual meetings and in-person meetings for this project section, specifically to tell the public about the details that were contained in the draft environmental document last fall. Next slide. We've also reached out to specific stakeholders, and we've listed some examples of those specific stakeholders who have expressed interest, particularly in this project section. Our next slide talks a little bit about the comments that have come in and the categories of those comments. Many of them are, I would say, typical of what we receive. I'm going to point out the hydro comments, which in this particular project section have been very interesting because of our tunneling. Both there are concerns with how we might impact groundwater, where we're getting our water for the tunnel boring. And so our team is working really hard. We had 481 individual submissions that then get divided into separate comments because a lot of times there's more than one comment in each letter. And so the team is working hard to respond to these comments and put out an administrative draft to the cooperating and participating agencies soon. And then we'll hope to wrap that up by the end of this year. Moving further south, our next project section is Burbank to Los Angeles. That environmental work, Rod Nod, was complete in 2022 of January of last year. Next slide. In that particular project section, we have been working with a group that is trying to develop a park in and around the river there. You can see on the bottom of this picture that there's a river. And that area, that land that looks vacant, which is vacant, they've been acquiring for development of a park. And it just happens that in this particular project section, we are planning to utilize the Metrolink corridor. And so you can see from this photo that there's existing park, the Metrolink corridor, land, and the river, and they wanted to connect those. And so when we finished that environmental document, we agreed to work with this group called the 100-Acre Partnership to kind of design some potential overpasses. And they're particularly interested in making sure that it's both for pedestrians, active pedestrians, and wildlife. And so we've almost finalized that report. We submitted our final draft to them and received their comments last week, and we'll finalize that report. And that'll give them something to build off of for grant opportunities in the future. So we were happy to participate with them to envision how it might look in the future to make that connection. Moving to the next slide. I'm pointing out Link US, or the Union Station, and where it falls in our alignment. We're going to have a little deeper dive on that later with Scott McConnell from Metro. So I'm going to just move on to the next slide, which is Los Angeles to Anaheim project section. So you can see how that connects us into Anaheim. This particular project section is a bit challenging. It's a very congested area. We're now into Southern California urban territory. And if we move to the next slide, in 2018, the board selected a preferred alternative. And this map shows the layout of where we will have our high-speed rail alignment. But the reason it's so blown out is because of the proposal for this corridor. It's currently a 3-track corridor. And it's BNSF Railway, who's a freight company. It's their main route into the United States. And it's a very busy corridor. So there's existing 3 mainline tracks. It's shared with Amtrak and Metrolink operations currently. And we proposed in our 2018 preferred alternative to come in and build what we referred to kind of casually as a 2+2 scenario. So there would be 2 tracks dedicated to freight and 2 tracks dedicated to passenger. And we thought that was a nice long-term vision for this particular corridor. In order to limit freight to 2 tracks, however, it required taking trains off of that corridor and would require us to build an intermodal facility somewhere to the east. And we located a property in the Colton area, which is shown in the little box here in orange, for an intermodal facility. And this particular proposal would also require staging tracks. And I'm going to go a little bit further into those in the next slide, but I wanted to kind of see the proximity in this particular map. So we'll move to the next slide, deeper dive into what was referred to as the Colton Intermodal Facility. You want to chime in?
Yeah, LaDonna, can I just pause for 1 second? Just for the board's interest, can you go back 1 slide? I just want to show something on this map, just so we're all tracking together. So that stretch from LA Union Station to the Arctic Station in Anaheim is the element here that we're talking about, where, as LaDonna said, it's congested with both passenger and freight rail today. I just wanted the members to understand that much like the Caltrain corridor in Northern California between San Francisco and San Jose, this is not a stretch that will see trains going 220 miles per hour, right? This is a stretch that, because of the congestion, adding additional passenger track will still be limited in this segment to about 110 to 125 miles per hour, depending on all the final design amounts that are in this. The other thing I just want the members to be aware of, under the bond law that passed, we are required to design a system where we get from San Francisco to downtown Los Angeles under a specific time requirement. That time requirement does not apply to this section. Again, I just want to make sure that the applicable time requirement is San Francisco to downtown Los Angeles. This segment is not applicable for that time requirement. So I just wanted to touch on those things.
Right.
So Brian,
yeah.
With regards to then to the right of way, are we pretty much tucked into existing rail right of way? Are we having to buy right of way anywhere as we've had to do in Central California?
Yeah, so we talked about this when the preferred alternative was before the board, and what we've brought to you was the alternative that had the least amount of right of way to purchase. And so we are pretty much within as LaDonna said, the BNSF owned right of way down there, where today both Amtrak and Metrolink operate there. They're limited on passenger traffic down there because there's only 3 tracks. So our part of this proposal is adding an additional track. When you add that additional track, you would have 4 tracks down there in this segment. 2 of those would be electrified under the proposal.
And that right of way, the width of the right of way will support.
We can get 4 tracks in the right of way.
Right of way. Yeah. Now there are certain elements where you got to bend out a little bit, but generally that's the idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's some over, under, and trying to move passenger and freight
Yeah.
to the,
Yeah.
yeah. There's some things we have to work around. Yeah.
Is BNSF in support of this?
They have been working with us typically until recently on the Colton thing, and I'm going to get into that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So that was the proposal in 2018. It included this Colton intermodal facility, which would allow BNSF to offload some containers that they have on their intermodal train in the Inland Empire. It would actually be closer to some of the warehouses in the Inland Empire, but it would be offloading containers and creating some truck traffic. So that's the picture that's shown on the left of the Colton component, proximity to the 10 freeway and the 215 if you're from that area. And then the staging tracks are really just a place, Bruce and I call it the wide spot in the pipe. It's a place where they can hold some freight trains if there's a lot of congestion within the corridor. As they get into the basin, the LA basin, it gives them some flexibility to hold a train in and around an area that's convenient for them before they get into the more congested corridors. So those were the two components that were contemplated by the 2018 preferred alternative. We moved to the next slide. We did a scoping for those two components in 2020. We held a 30-day scoping comment period, and we received a number of comment submissions specifically on those components. Concerns were about the truck traffic, the air quality, and the environmental justice. And I'm going to go more specifically into some of those comments that have led us to think that this might not be a feasible approach. But let's do a deep dive. So the next slide, comment from San Bernardino County Transportation Authority that this didn't seem in spirit with the governor's executive order, which was to reduce greenhouse gases and to take into consideration the heavily disadvantaged communities. So this particular area of Colton is disadvantaged community, and they thought that was inconsistent with the governor's directive. Next slide is from the air quality management. These are just some samples of some of the comments we received, but Air Quality Management District asking us to proactively work with BNSF to reduce freight emissions, specifically requiring Tier 4 locomotives. And the relevance of that is that BNSF and the two freight railroads have an equivalent of a Tier 2 fleet. So this would better locomotives and zero emission trucks as well. They were encouraging us to look at, and then putting some sort of enforceable mechanism in place for us to enforce that of BNSF. And they are actually in the process now of doing a rulemaking that will include all of these elements in their rulemaking for AQMD. So it just added another layer of complication, or it is adding another layer. Next slide is from some of our, the city of Colton. They were open-minded, I think, at first, but definitely concerned about the trucks that would be part of the additional 10 freight trains that we were planning to build that facility for. And then last one, the last quote is from, thank you. Oh, I thought that was the last one. I'm off one. Metrolink, who is already using the corridor, and we had hoped, would chime in and say, yeah, this was a great long-term plan. They didn't feel a need for Colton. They thought that there was enough capacity within the corridor. So these are quotes from Metrolink that they didn't see that it was necessary. And then I think I'm going to how we responded. Okay, so I'm not that far. The next slide after this one, how we responded. So we have looked at these comments and considered the concerns from the public. And our first step was to say, well, could we put the Colton component somewhere else? Would it make sense to look at other locations? But the whole point of Colton was to get trains off the corridor, and we didn't want to significantly increase truck traffic even more, longer trips. So we kind of had a limited area to look at, and we could not identify in a very urban area, something that made sense as an alternative site for Colton that didn't have similar environmental justice concerns. We also, well, and taking into, as you pointed out, BNSF also having seen these comments has waning interest. I'm just referring it to as they just started to get cold feet also. I think they saw the uphill challenge and they became less participating. Now we're back in our slides. So the authority's program delivery committee has actually reviewed what's happening, and we don't think it's realistic to proceed with Colton. So at this time, we've stopped work on the Colton component, and we're focusing our time and attention on what else could we do? Is there some other alignment or something else that we could look at? So we are preparing a supplemental alternatives analysis. We think that we've identified something that will work within the existing corridor by, instead of a 2+2 scenario, we would actually share one of the passenger tracks. Similar to what they're doing now, they're sharing the 3 main lines. We would be sharing one of the passenger tracks. So even though we'd have 2 that would be electrified, we'd be sharing one of the electrified tracks. And we think by doing that, we can get a volume that's sufficient. We're finalizing our supplemental alternatives analysis. I will come back to you in a couple months. So we hope to have that done. And I'll be able to give you all the details of what we're looking at for a proposed new build alternative for that area. So we haven't lost hope, but we have stopped work on that component.
So this alternative, would this potentially lead to satisfying any rail or any line requirements within the existing right of way then? We would, in other words, if we're only would be building one, that will eliminate also the whole thing with the going to Colton likely.
We think that we can get sufficient volume and an operating plan that will work for everyone within the existing corridor, adding one main track. And there are some other components to what had been proposed in the LA to Anaheim section area that will make operations more efficient for passenger and freight. And we think with those components, we'll be able to get a sufficient volume of trains. It might not be the future high peak that we would have gotten with Colton, but it definitely would fit within the service plan that we're
Does this likely translate into even a reduction in cost for us?
Those are all really good questions. I think it's an opportunity to share with the other partners that are in that corridor. And that is one of the things that we like about this corridor, because there are other operators there. It would put us in line better for capital and operating funds. So capital funds could proceed without us there for projects that they're going to benefit well before we get there.
There was an open question though about who would pay for the Colton facility. And as I would just say,
I'm sure
the elimination of the Colton facility relieves some burden on us there.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the next slide, the last slide I have on LA to A is just summarizing that we'll finish the supplemental alternatives analysis. We did look at a couple other alignments, so we want to make sure that we fully let the public know of what we took a look at, and we'll propose a new build alternative, and we'll be back to the board for consideration and selection of a preferred alternative. Okay, just a few wrap-up slides. The outreach team is active in Southern California, and we're trying to hit some pop-up events and go to high school presentations. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew we're continuing to focus on that activity. And one more slide. I think it was at the last meeting that this was just announced, like the day of the meeting. So I wanted to toot our horn again. Our partnership with Women's Transportation Seminar, the WTSLA chapter submitted high-speed rail as employer of the year for the nationwide recognition. And so Beverly Kenworthy, in the center of this photo, went and accepted the award on our behalf. But it was just really an exciting opportunity and our great partnership with WTSLA. With that, I think the next slide is just about our social media and staying in touch with you and with us. And I'm going to introduce Scott McConnell with Metro, who, if I can get your title right, Executive Officer, Program Management Division. Did I get close? All right, I'm going to let Scott talk to you about two of our bookend projects, Link US as well as Rosecrans Marquardt, which I forgot to mention, but he's going to tell you all about.
As Scott gets into this, I just want to remind the board members and those who are newer board members that under the initial funding agreement from Proposition 1A, there was an agreement, I think the year or two after it passed, where $600 million would be available for projects in Northern California that in the short term help regional operators or regional providers of service. And in the long term, help high-speed rail. The example in the Bay Area is the Caltrain electrification project, for which we are funding about $733 million. And a grade separation in the peninsula called the San Mateo Street grade separation that is now complete. In Southern California, the board voted to send the $500 million to two projects: the Rosecrans Marquardt grade separation, which at that time was identified as the single most dangerous grade crossing in California. That Scott will go through this, but that project is now in construction. The second one, which is a big one, is the roughly $423 million that the board agreed to put towards the LA Union Station, LA US Link, or LA Union Station remodel project, if you will, to upgrade the project, the facility, and have it move from an end of a trail of a train track to a pass-through or run-through train track, which really makes it much more efficient operationally, and ultimately make improvements to the station that will accommodate high-speed rail in the future. So that's where we voted to send these dollars. Scott is here today to update the issues around the LA Union Station project as well as Rosecrans Marquardt. Yeah.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great. Thank you for the invitation today, and thank you, LaDonna, for the introduction. So I'm here to talk about Link US as well as the Rosecrans Marquardt project. I'm an executive officer with Metro, working out of our program management division. Next slide, please. So I'll start with Link US, Union Station. Just a purpose and need, a recap for the need, the necessity, and the priority for our project. As you can see, Union Station's at the center of LA County. It serves the county, LA County, other counties. There's 6 other counties that we have rail service that connects to Union Station. And we also have interstate service to Union Station. Metro has recently just opened, in this year alone, has opened 2 lines, the K line, Crenshaw. And we've also completed last weekend, we opened up the regional connector project. And that provides improved rail service for our A and E lines. So now there's a connection between Azusa to Long Beach, as well as from Boyle Heights to Santa Monica. So Metro is actively engaged and also working on some additional extensions of their purple B line and D lines to UCLA. So as we move forward with time here, the rail continues to expand in Los Angeles, throughout the city and throughout the state. So we have new rail service here in Union Station. The purpose of our project here is really to bring it all together. Next slide, please.
Is it too early to assess the implications on ridership with all these new lines because it's too close to COVID, or are you seeing it already?
Well, I'm not, I don't have the details to talk about ridership.
Yeah, just your
today.
general sense.
In a general sense, I understand that, yes, there is less ridership than before COVID. Our understanding is the Amtrak Losan service is approaching pre-COVID levels.
Okay, thank you.
So this demonstrates the new high-speed rail service that's expected to connect to Union Station. We have the California High-Speed Rail
connection to the north and to the south. There also is a Brightline project which connects Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga. And to connect the two projects, we're envisioning a high desert corridor to the north. And there's some Antelope Valley improvements to the west. All this provides increased demand at Union Station. Next slide, please. So here's our tale of woe. Union Station, built in 1939, beautiful station there in the lower left. It's a stub-ended station, one way in, one way out, not very efficient. We have a throat to the north, which is narrow, which makes it even more complicated getting trains in and out of the rail yard to the platforms. Next slide, please.
Sir, I have a question for you, and maybe
Yes.
maybe you'll answer it here. The year or so back, we provided funding to complete renovation of this Union Station. Is that in progress or completed, or is that
For
what we're
the
done right now?
Metrolink has undergone some improvements with that investment. That's still ongoing,
Okay,
and it's nearing completion.
okay, thank you.
Here is the Link US project, phase A and B. We split it up into two phases. This is the complete project, which includes a run-through structure at the stub end that goes across the 101 freeway, and then it connects to the mainline tracks on the west bank. And we also need to accommodate the run-through structure. We need to raise the rail yard and also make some platform improvements and make the station more accessible. It was built in 1939. It doesn't meet the current standards.
Hey, Scott, can I pause you right there? Just
Yes.
Henry, I want to make sure that we answered your question thoroughly. The 423 million that the board provided to the station is for essentially this description of this project on this slide, but this work is not commenced yet. And we have not spent any of the 423 for this. So I just want to be clear on that point. Okay. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Our first plan is phase A. That would include a ramp shortening, or excuse me, a platform shortening and a ramp to the run-through structure, construction of the run-through structure, and then some active transportation improvements, bike lanes in and around the area. One thing to note is that, not only do we have several rail connections, but it's envisioned that we are, introducing a bike path along the LA River with the ultimate connectivity to Union Station. Also, I wanted to mention as a part of Union Station, we do have several bus connections where our Patsasaurus Transit Plaza connects to that. So it's it's an active area, and these improvements will help make the station more efficient. Next slide, please. So here are the benefits. We have expanded rail capacity with our project. We can accommodate as much as 500 trains. Right now, it's 178 trains, but with the improvements, we can accommodate 500 trains, daily trip movements, reduced dwell times, provide one-seat rides across the Southern California region. Right now, there's a need to deboard the trains. Now with this run-through service, we can connect Ventura to San Diego. We have expanded passageway. Again, the station is built in 1939. With the new rail service, we would need to expand the passageway to deliver a level of comfort for our passengers to and from the platforms. Wider rail platforms from 21 to 28 feet, and ADA improvements as well. Next slide, please. Last spring, we worked with California High-Speed Rail to develop a funding agreement. Thank you very much. We have an investment of 423 million. That was the agreement was based on our early work with the project. There was an expectation that we would proceed with building the project with state and local funding.
And we developed I guess, a cost and schedule back in 2019 to reflect that. Next slide, please. So the original agreement included us completing the work in summer of 2028. However, our new forecast, we've taken a new look at the cost and schedule for the project, shows that our completion date is now in summer of 2033. We've taken a new look at the schedule. We provided some additional contingency to try and address the challenges. And next slide, please. Originally, we envisioned the cost for our project to be $950 million. We've taken a fresh look and come up with a new estimate for the project. Right now, our estimate is at $1.9 billion for delivery in 2033. But these cost projections at this time do not include value engineering, which is currently taking place with stakeholders. Next slide, please. Some of the cost increases are shown here. Taking a fresh look, we believe that the construction cost is a little bit higher than originally expected. We've applied some additional contingency on the project. LaDonna was mentioning earlier, there's some challenges with respect to connecting to the railroad corridor south of Union Station. We have a similar challenge in connecting to the West Bank, which is the west main line, just south of our station. There's escalation. We also did not originally allow for what we call the Malva Yard. The West Bank at this time is occupied by BNSF. They've asked in order to acquire that property that we make some improvements to the Malvar Yard, which is in the city of Vernon. It's a train yard. Those improvements would be a mitigation for use of the West Bank in a storage yard that they're currently using. Next slide. So as a part of our PMFA, we do have a remediation plan that is required. So we will work with staff to come up with a remediation plan to address the funding gap and the schedule slippage. We will follow these guidelines as set forth in our PMFA. Next slide. So we will work with a new cost and schedule based on the value engineering that we're currently doing. We are also going to reach out to other stakeholders to reduce risk and costs. As mentioned before, we have some challenges with respect to BNSF and the timeliness of when we can acquire the West Bank. So we're covering that risk at this time with our current price. If we get some agreement with BNSF, we can help reduce that cost and risk. And overall, we want to develop a funding strategy to seek additional funding to cover the funding gap. We believe that there's an opportunity to get an investment at the federal level. A lot of investment has been made on the Eastern Corridor with the rail there, and perhaps there could be an equal investment here on the West Coast. LA is the second most populous metro region in the United States. So perhaps there'd be an investment here on the West Coast and Los Angeles for this project. Any questions before I move on to Rosecrans Marquardt?
Go ahead.
Okay, next slide, please. Here's the Rosecrans Marquardt project. This is a rendering as it was before we began construction. It's the most dangerous crossing in the state of California. It's also a future alignment as a part of the high-speed rail project. We had an investment early on from high-speed rail, so thank you for that. Next slide, please. Here is our funding plan. As you can see, number 2 is the investment from this board. Thank you. The project, next slide. Overall, these are the benefits. Improved safety. Obviously, it's a grade separation project, better air quality, rail efficiency for commuters that are passing through the intersection. And it also enhances goods movements. Next slide. So here's an update. We've completed our right-of-way certification. Our final plans and specs were sent out for bid, and we awarded a construction contract to Flatiron. They're currently performing the work. We've completed our AUR work, and we're anticipating construction completion in fall of 2025. Next slide. So here are I have a few pictures here of some of the updates with respect to our construction. We have on our left some caissons that were installed, right, bent cap construction. And next slide, please. You can see it now all coming together. So we have, as you can see here, we've got on the right the precast girders we placed to accommodate the grade step crossing, and on the left is some earth embankment construction. Next slide. Any questions?
If I can just ask one, with regards to the LAUS remediation, when's your estimate of when that will be completed?
Fall of this year.
Fall of this year?
Yeah, so we'll continue to work with staff, both your staff, Metro staff, and also with Metrolink and all the stakeholders.
Okay, that's great.
To refine the cost and
Okay.
schedule and find opportunities to save costs.
Thank you. Any other questions from our, yes, Director Camacho?
The delta that you have on US is $1 billion then?
Roughly, yes.
And so you have an agreement with high-speed rail to complete this within a certain schedule and with certain deliverables. And if you can't, then you're going to come back with a mitigation plan. That's the mitigation plan you're talking about.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Scott, thank you very much. Director, Vice Chair Miller.
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to thank you for the presentation. I know that Rosecrans area, and it's amazing what you're doing down there and how that will help. And also for your support in the past of our project. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming up.
Thank you.
LaDonna? You're all done?
I have a
Well,
question.
hang
I
on
do
just
have a
one
question for LaDonna.
Yes, Director Perea?
Yeah, going back to your slide number 3, page 3 on the Southern California connectivity.
Yes.
We can get that slide up, please.
Says Bakersfield to Palmdale?
Yes. Two things. One on the blue lines that identify the Metrolink lines. How many of those are existing lines and how many are proposed, which are proposed, if any?
I believe these are all existing. This is actually from our last business plan. I'm looking for Melissa and I don't see her. I believe they're all existing.
Okay.
This was straight out of our business plan to show the connectivity of what we propose to existing lines.
Okay, so Metrolink right now has a train that runs to Palmdale?
Yes.
Okay, right. The question I have has to do with the bright line. Line shows the green here going to Victor Valley, then veering off to Rancho Cucamonga. I want to go back to maybe a few years when, I mean, one of our big selling points for high-speed rail was the connectivity that the Vegas line was going to bring to our system, connect right into it. And this is a pretty significant deviation, at least from what was proposed and told to this board. So my question is around, and also I know we're competing with them right now for federal grants, so we're in competition for dollars. Is that decision final, number one? And two, what is the opportunity for this board to weigh in on that line and change it, going back to the original plan, which should have been to Victor Valley, then to Palmdale? Because that's when it made sense, and staff, I think, did a very good job in selling and explaining to us the fact that this is the connectivity that would then shoot this line across the country. And this, what is being proposed now, defeats that purpose. And I don't know if this is before your time.
Yeah, this is, you're pointing out something on the graph that we didn't catch. I mean, this is to depict connectivity. It is not to scale. And there's probably a little bit of, which you're pointing out, there's a little bit of confusion with respect to the Victorville to Palmdale. It shows on this graphic as Brightline, but it's technically not Brightline.
Correct.
The High Desert Corridor Joint Powers Authority is working on the environmental clearance for that line. So that is still proceeding, and it was probably more accurate in Scott's graphic to that point, because that's a Joint Powers Authority that is environmentally clearing between Palmdale and Victor Valley. Brightline has not committed to operate a high-speed rail. They're just, but still it's being cleared for high-speed rail service. So theoretically, our operator could operate on it into Victor Valley. So with respect to that particular corridor, showing it as Brightline is probably not entirely accurate, because Brightline has said that they are focused on their Rancho Cucamonga connection.
Right.
And that is their full commitment for their plan right now, not to Palmdale. Doesn't mean things can't change at some point in the future. They're
Well,
just not
and I'm
permitting.
glad you said that, because Mr. Chairman, if it meets with your approval, I'd like this board to maybe engage a little deeper on that whole issue, and maybe have a presentation going back to the original plan to connect to Palmdale. Talk about the deviation now that we're seeing. And I think if we're going to be in competition with them now for federal funding, I think this board needs to take a position on where that bright line should be connecting.
Yeah. I think a good point, Director Perea. I think with regards to Brightline, I think from everything that I'm aware of, or what I've certainly read like you have, their line is, they've got it planned now, which is going from Las Vegas to Victorville and down to Rancho Cucamonga. I think that's reasonably approved at this point, and as best I know, they have the rights to the right of way, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of Palmdale, I think that's still, it may be at some point a possibility, certainly a question mark, but their focus is clearly, and with the approvals they've gotten, is to go to Rancho Cucamonga.
But the original was to go to Palmdale, is that correct?
The original idea was that they were going to meet with us in terms of our line at Palmdale, and they would connect in at that point at Palmdale. That was the longer term line. And initially, it was always to Victorville. So, but the expectation certainly was that. I'm not sure that the expectations changed, but one of the challenges I would guess would be that we've got to get to Palmdale. So getting to Palmdale without us getting there, there's really nowhere for them to go other than, as was mentioned earlier, it touches to Metrolink at that point. But I mean, I think that the other thing you're asking, as you've noticed, and Brian will mention, we're going to have a workshop in September. Certainly a major portion of that workshop will be just a discussion of Brightline.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. LaDonna, that's this has been a great presentation. We couldn't have asked for any more.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm just going to do the monthly CEO report I do, and mostly pick up starting with where Henry left off, which is the issue of how and when we connect with Brightline. The initial Brightline plan was Vegas to Victorville, as Tom indicated. The question has always been, where would we connect ultimately with their system, the roughly a 50-mile stretch between Victorville and Palmdale. And as Palmdale was on our alignment, there was a lot of conversation and talk about how the service could connect through that high desert corridor. As we work through that, that's still something that we are talking and want to continue to talk about with Brightline. They made a unilateral, of course, decision to pivot to Rancho Cucamonga, which they're now doing. They worked out some right-of-way agreements with the state agency and Caltrans using the I-15 corridor to build that. And so the question still remains, where's the best connecting point with high-speed rail and Brightline? And that's the subject of the first thing I have on this list, which is Tom mentioned. We're looking at doing both a board meeting and a workshop relative to the Brightline, the emergence of the Brightline system and how it affects our system. You know, from where I stand, the good news is there's the expansion of electrified high-speed rail going on in California, both in Southern California and in Northern California. And it's good now to start talking about how will these two systems complement each other and work together. So that's something that we want to bring to the board in a workshop in San Diego on the third week of September. Now, I will just say these dates say September 20th and 21st. We may have a little move one day or the other. We'll come back to the board, but we're trying to nail down facilities in San Diego for that. But again, we have a board meeting on day one and day two, a workshop dedicated to some of the Brightline issues. And so that's forthcoming. Okay. Next slide. Utility relocations, again, responding to Director Perea. I did include in all of the members' background stuff, some utility relocation numbers and estimates of dates for 96 key utility relocations that are part of our overall goal to move utilities. As you heard, at least the Finance and Audit Committee heard earlier today on CP1, which is the part of our construction package that has the most utility relocations. There are a total of 992 relocations to do through downtown Fresno of water, energy, electricity, and gas lines and telecom lines. 774 of those are underway. As we speak now, they're either completed or in progress. That leaves 218. Of that 218, there's 96 that we identify that are tied to project elements that are on the critical path, where these are the project elements that will be done at the latest time in our schedule for CP1 to be concluded. Of these 96, we're planning to get 82 of them done in 2023 and 14 of them done in 2024 of these 96 for this purpose. Our goal for 2023 calendar year is to move 239 utilities, which is in the information we provide to the Finance and Audit Committee each week, and all the board members have access to that data. Sorry. It's in the F&A material, not in the board material, but on the utility stuff, it's in the what we call the Central Valley update report, which is in the F&A numbers. Anyway, so that is our plan and our program to move forward on utility relocations. And I know, Henry, I don't know if there's any additional questions you want to go through now, or happy to pause.
Yeah, just if you have the substantial completion timeline for CP1.
Yes. Well, we're finishing up the final TIA with the CP1, as I've indicated in prior board meetings. It'll be in 2026, and we're finalizing what month that'll be through the execution of our final TIA.
About when do you think you have that?
I think we'll have it by July.
By July.
July hearing. I think we're at the finalizing. Let me look at my team. We're finalizing that TIA now.
Okay.
And so we should have that in July.
And from a strategy standpoint, what is it we're doing with these third-party folks to elevate the discussions with their higher ups?
Yeah, several good questions. Several things. We dedicated new personnel to head up just the third-party question. There's really two divisions within the authority, three actually, that come into play on moving these utilities. One is the folks on the ground, the construction guys who are leading the construction work and identifying the utilities that got to be moved. But to make sure that we have a keen focus on that, because look, I've said this before, you guys are all sick of hearing me say this. but we are moving utilities out of sequence, right? We're doing this after we started construction. So that's not where we want to be. We will not be in that position going forward. But while we're doing this, it's a bit of a grind. So that said, we've dedicated personnel to the third-party issues to go after what the guys on the ground identify. Dennis Kim, who's been heading up our right-of-way work, is now our third-party director as well. And he is working with the guys on the ground, the construction management team. We brought in additional resources from our PDS contract. And they're all identifying the highest priority issues, working through what those are, what that schedule will look like to meet our ultimate completion date. And anything that needs to be elevated is getting elevated. We initially elevated about 67 items that had to be elevated to get resolved. As I'm sitting here today, 66 of those are resolved. There's one issue remaining, which is an AT&T issue on Stanislaus Street, which will be a structure you're probably familiar with that will be demolished ultimately, but there's AT&T equipment on that. So we have to work through them where we locate and how we relocate that equipment. And that's a conversation we're having between me right now and the highest level of AT&T.
All right, thank you.
Sure. Okay, the last issue, which I referenced earlier, next slide here. Oh, sorry, no, stay on this, go back, sorry. Yeah, stay on this one, right here. The other thing I just want to report to the board relative to utilities is we have essentially an account that's referred to as our provisional sums account, which is an account that we from time to time replenish to make sure we can finish all of the utility work that's in front of us. Mostly it's tied to PG&E and AT&T facilities. And we just executed an order to move 107 million into the provisional sums account so we can have sufficient funding to complete the utilities work that's in front of us. And so I just want to report to the board that we executed that, and how it works as money goes in that account. And then we issue task orders on a timely basis when the utilities are ready to move. And we work through that account to complete the work. And next slide. I mentioned earlier upcoming procurements, and I just wanted to take a moment to talk about it again. I'll conclude on this unless there's any other questions, but we laid out a schedule in the project update report on how we get the 119 miles done, how we'd move to get the 171 operating segment underway. And that's going to require the board to work with us on approving important procurements that are coming up. And so to deliver on that schedule, both in the PER and our agreement with the Federal Railroad Administration, we're going to want to advance these things in the later half of 2023. Both the installation of track and systems where the civil works are completed. You'll see us coming back with track first on CP4 because that'll be completed before CPs 1 and 2, 3. We got to get into the conversation on the procurement of trains. And that means we want to start qualifying train manufacturers. We'll be coming back soon on that as well. And we want to implement the procurement strategy that incorporates broader procurement methods, probably smaller contracts than we've had before, increased flexibility, and an emphasis on maximizing qualified bidder pools. And so Bruce Armistead, who you heard from earlier out of our Rail Ops division, and Bill Casey, our Chief Operating Officer, who's got quite a bit of experience and expertise in some of these procurement methods, will talk to the board next month about exactly the lessons learned that we are applying. And then you can count on us coming before you in the subsequent months, August, September, October, to advance some of these procurements. And I just wanted to prepare the board for that dialogue that we're going to have coming up. And again, it's going to be important that we execute that to stay on our current schedule. So we're also doing this way in a timed way and a phased way to make sure that we know where we are with federal funding before we make any commitments broader than the things we know we have to get done. So with that said, I'm happy to answer questions or.
Thank you. Any questions for our CEO? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Let me just finish quickly with dropping a few numbers from finance and audit for my colleagues and for the public. These numbers again will be as of April the 30th. We had $3.4 billion in cash available, of which roughly 950 million of that was Proposition 1A, and another 2.4 million it was cap and trade. What's not included in there, the May auction for cap and trade, the estimate, and it's still not at this point, defined exactly, but the estimate is that we'll get about 244 billion, or excuse me, million. I wish billion. On the admin budget, we are up year over year, but the basic reason for it is the filling of 59 vacant positions year over year, about 1.2 million up from the previous. Monthly expenditures for the month of April, we had 127 million, of which 84.5 million were for design build contract expenses. The expectation for May, and that's an expectation, is the 127 looks like it might be up as well as the design build up to about 84.5, or excuse me, 96.5 from the 84.5 that it was this year, or excuse me, the month of April. Contingency summary, we've had at the end of April still about 2.1 billion remaining. In the Central Valley Construction Report, labor on-site average daily was up by 277 employees a day, or contractors a day, I should say. That's up to 1,246 was the average per day. Right of way, we're sitting right now at 71 parcels is all that is left out of 2,293 were necessary for the 119 miles. The final two parcels have already been delivered, and so CP4, meaning final two and CP4, there are no parcels left to be delivered in CP4. Utility relocations, there were 16 relocations in the month of April. That means that in the completed are 1,034, in progress another 390, and approved to start 21, not started and not approved to start are 390. There's a total of 1,836 utility relocations necessary, excuse me, in the 119 miles. In terms of CP construction progress, there were no additional structures or guideways in April. We were still, as you recall, we were still suffering from are benefiting at the same time for most of the state, benefiting from the rain, but suffering on the construction schedule. So with that, that will, unless there are any questions, that will complete just a quick summary of F&A for today. For those in the public, either here or out and listening or watching, we are now going to go into a closed session. I'll come back after the closed session to let you know if there's anything to report. I'm going to guess that we might be able to do that in about 30 minutes. So thank you for being with us, and hang on if you want to hear if there's anything to report on closed session. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, and then I just.
Yeah, that works, that works. Yeah, yeah.
Whenever you're ready, Tom. Ready. Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. The California High-Speed Rail Authority's Board of Directors has completed a closed session this afternoon, the 29th of June. We have nothing to report, and so with that, in other words, no decisions, no anything, but simply nothing to report. So with that, we wish you all a good weekend and happy 4th of July. This meeting is adjourned. We'll see you in July.